This week, the bell rings at the Nasdaq to celebrate America's immigrant heritage, and the captains of industry pay tribute.
We're a stronger and better company because of the diversity of our workforce, just as we are stronger and better as a country.
And later, my conversation with a man who went from picking crops to working at the White House and is now a leading advocate for Hispanic immigrants.
You kind of walk into it with a different expectation, like you can change the world. But it turns out that you have to actually seek to persuade others to see your point of view.
From the National Immigration Forum, I'm Ali Nirani with Only in America.
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 Last week, I was with dozens of dreamers, TPS recipients, and other immigrants in New York City to ring in the morning bell at the Nasdaq Stock Exchange, part of the celebration of Immigrant Heritage Month. Mingling with executives from Microsoft and young leaders from immigrant communities across the nation was a poignant reminder of the success generations of immigrants have brought to our shores and how they're driving today's global economy. At the podium that morning in New York was Rosanna DeRuthi, the head of global diversity for LinkedIn.
I am proud to be a Latina of African and Spanish descent. This June, we commemorate Immigrant Heritage Month. And today, we are honored to join dreamers and immigrants at Nasdaq to celebrate. LinkedIn and Microsoft are proud of the contributions that immigrants make to our company and to our country. We value the important role that immigrants have played and continue to play building great products and companies and creating economic opportunity globally. We're a stronger and better company because of the diversity of our workforce, just as we are stronger and better as a country.
Come back in here. So first of all, we are obviously very proud of our relationship with Microsoft, but I think we're more proud of the work that you're all doing to promote diversity, inclusion, and to celebrate Immigrant Heritage Month. So on behalf of our team, I'm proud to present the three of you with our NASDAQ opening bell crystal. And can I put you on the spot?
Sure.
So you like this stuff.
I do.
The finance end of it.
Absolutely.
So we obviously have a lot of young people in the audience, and as you think about your career and maybe your passion, can you share with me maybe, or share for them, you know, some words of, you know, your life that have kind of inspired you to reach for bigger and better things?
Certainly. What I would share is that we are never our circumstances. We are the possibility of greatness and opportunity. It's what America was founded on, and it's what each of us strive for every day. I'm proud to be a part of a company that works to have people be more productive and more successful each day, but I'm particularly proud of this group of people in the company of NASDAQ, where we make things happen every day.
Absolutely. So please accept this opening bell crystal. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
There are celebrations in towns and cities across America for Immigrant Heritage Month in the coming weeks. You can find yours at IamAnImmigrant.com. And if there's nothing happening locally, you can organize your own Immigrant Heritage Month celebration. This is Only in America. I'm Ali Nirani. My guest this week is Daniel Garza, president of the Libre Initiative, a grassroots nonprofit which works to empower the Hispanic communities of America. As you'll hear, Daniel's experience is clearly his guide. Growing up in a family of farm workers, they followed the crops from Nuevo León, Mexico, to California, to Nebraska, to Washington State. That circular migration ended when his parents decided to settle in Toppenish, Washington. Daniel's life story is one of a farm worker, a high school dropout, a city councilor, a Bush administration senior official, and now an advocate. Last year, in fact, Daniel was named by CQ magazine as one of Washington, D.C.'s influentials. There are a few people I've met who honor and advocate for the American dream like Daniel Garza. And we began our conversation when I asked Daniel about his childhood, growing up between two countries.
My parents were from a small town called Garza Gonzalez, Nuevo León, Mexico. They married and they came to America to make a better life for themselves, basically. And they had family already that was situated in the Central Valley of California. And I was born in '68. And so it was not long after that we moved to Washington State, still following sort of the crop seasons. My parents were farm workers. And so there was better opportunity by picking apples, pears, and peaches and cherries than there was picking grapes. And so we moved to Washington State, and that's basically where I was raised.
And did you travel back to Mexico to visit, where your parents were from?
Yeah, so that's the thing. For us and my aunts and uncles, winter were spent in Mexico, in a small town, and usually after the apple season, and then right before the thinning season started again, was the time we spent in Mexico. So it was you could go by the crop seasons as to when we were going to be in Mexico and when we were going to be traveling, around the U.S. following, the opportunities, the contracts.
Did that stop, that circular migration of your family being able to go from place to place? Or did it stop, or did your parents decide, okay, you know what, we're going to set down roots?
Yeah, it kind of had to, Ali. One, because, my parents were beginning to save some money, and I think they were starting to look at America long term, where before it was strictly temporary, right? So they could make enough money to go back to Mexico. Pretty soon, as we started growing up and, getting higher in our education, in our school level, I think our parents started to see America as the place where we were going to be much more permanent, even though I think initially we would spend about 4 or 5 months in Mexico when I was growing up. By about the time I was 12 or 13, that was down to 2 or 3 months. And then by the time I was 16, it was down to only 1 month.
That still seems like a lot of time to be spending kind of moving back and forth between countries when you're growing up and trying to
we paid the
getting
price
an education.
I mean, yeah, I missed so much school. One, because working in the fields every other day with my parents, and then going to Mexico and sometimes Nebraska and back to California, that by the 10th grade, my school attendance record literally looked like a checkerboard. And I was told by my counselor that if I returned to Mexico during my time when I had first started the 11th grade, she said that I would have to repeat the 11th grade. And I said, listen, I don't get to decide whether I go or not. What happens next year when I have to go back to Mexico? And she says, well, then you just keep repeating the 11th grade. That was my last day in school, Ali. I'm a high school dropout, to my eternal shame. But those were my circumstances, and that was my reality, and there was nothing I could do about it.
So then tell me how you go from being a high school dropout to where you are today. I had no idea about that part of your story.
Working in the White House.
Yeah, working in the White House. Yeah.
So at 17, I had a critical decision to make, and so I started to work full time in the fields with my dad. I actually worked in the fields until I was 19 years of age, and my break, Ali, was when I got a GED. That was my second chance, and it put me back on track. And actually went back to college, or went to college because of that, with a couple of cousins that had graduated at the time. And I entered law enforcement. I became a police officer, which was a dream of mine, that I didn't think I could realize. But thank goodness, that I was able to achieve that. And it was during my time as a police officer that I saw, what was happening to my community. Really, for the first time, I kind of opened my eyes to it. The domestic violence, the drugs, the gang violence, everything that my generation was facing. And so I decided to get involved, and I actually ran for city council. And I think that's what set me on track, for politics, right? Little did I know at 17, I was a high school dropout. 17 years later, I'd be working at the White House, because of those decisions to get back on track.
Yeah, I was wondering, looking at your bio, what led you to pursue this life of public service? I mean, was there, when you were a police officer, was there a particular moment where you said, you know what, I've got to take this next step?
there were instances, right? That made me think, well, we're 80% of the population in the small town of Toppenish, Washington, in the Yakima Valley, Latinos. Yet there was no representation in city council, and and I was the only police officer at the time who was Latino. It didn't seem to me like that was fair representation. And so, instead of, criticizing or yelling about it, well, you be the difference, right? You make the change. And so I decided that I would run for city council. And I went up against this gentleman who had been a councilman for the longest time, and I didn't think I had a chance. And but I worked hard, and worked the community, and they elected me. And so it was a high honor to actually be elected.
And what was it like to be a legislator, representing constituents and serving their needs directly?
Well, you kind of walk into it with a different expectation, like you can change the world, but it turns out that you have to actually seek to persuade others to see your point of view. And so there was just a lot of things that I had to fight for, where I was on the minority end of a 6-1 vote. Should we put the community center in this side of town, where Latinos were and low income? No, I lost that vote 6-1 because they wanted to put it in the West End, where it was nicer place and safer. Mm-hmm. But if you don't build it on the East End, then how are we ever going to, lift up that community? Anyways, these kind of fights, right? And like the town that I came from, folks built their walls, their fences in front of their homes 10 feet high for security. And so they didn't allow for that in my community. And so they wanted to change the law, and I lost that one too. So just a lot of recognition that I think that you had to be very persuasive and learn how to communicate, your message better. So anyways, it was a good lesson to learn.
I am fascinated by local politics in this way. Just the issue of representation of a fast changing cities and towns. The constituents, the Latino population that was 80% of Toppenish. Did they realize that you were that one and those 6-1 votes? Did they feel like you were their guy?
I like to think that they did, because that was my message, right? That I would get on the city council and I would be that voice, and that I would, work also to unite Latinos with non-Latinos, and not just be the guy who's going to make noise, right? And demand things, but to be persuasive. And I think, as the years went by, I think I got better at it, right? And I learned to communicate better, learned to unite with other folks and form coalitions and bring them to my side. And really, I think that's what we try to do from those lessons learned at the Libre Initiative, is to unite citizens behind policy reforms that I think are so important to the Latino community and America overall, right?
So tell me a little bit about the Libre Initiative, because it feels like you all are again, kind of moving into a new space in terms of political identity for the Latino community.
So, if you read the newspapers lately about Freedom Partners and Now Stand Together, it would seem that way, right? But, the Libre Initiative has always been seeking to unite with other folks to try to achieve a consensus around certain reform. We've been trying to do on the whole situation with Dreamers. There's no question that you have to work with the other side, maybe the opposing voices, to reach a consensus. You can't do it on your own, and you're not going to impose your vision of America onto others. It has to be persuasive. And so we've always worked by that model, and I'm glad to see that the entire network has really sort of shifted towards that kind of approach to things.
So the work that you all have done, particularly say with Dreamers, how do you, as the leader of the Libre Initiative, because you're one of the few folks in the movement, I think, who are speaking pretty consistently to both the left and the right, do you feel like there are differences that people don't see, or actually similarities that people don't see from different political perspectives?
I think seemingly, right, it appears that both sides are being pressured by a minority in their ranks to not give in to the priority of the other side. So, because thus far, we have seen one opportunity after another to unite around a bipartisan solution. really sort of squandered by both sides. Where we see the Democrats proposing things that really are sort of just more like one-dimensional self-interest, and we see Republicans doing exactly the same thing. And American people expect their elected leadership to work together, not promote an agenda of division and political self-interest. And it's happening all over again, with just the recent proposals from the Trump administration and, Lucille Roybal. It doesn't have to continue like this. This is a bipartisan solution that we feel that we can put on the table is just by considering what the other side is asking for. And it just doesn't seem like, either side is doing that.
So what does it take to reach that place? Because we've been working together on this for a long time. So on this episode of Only in America, we're going to figure it out, Daniel. So give me your answer. What should we be doing?
Bipartisanship. I know it sounds cliche, but what both sides have also been trying to do is to avoid looking weaker, right, on the other side of this issue. And neither have to. And in the end, we can arrive at the solution. The American people win. And that's what should matter to them. Our economy is made stronger. Employers and educators can plan the future, and our DACA kids can finally take full control of their destinies. 84% of Americans agree to this, and 73% of Trump voters too, by the way. So, I think what we need to do is just to continue to call on these folks to come together, reconcile their differences, and reach this consensus for the good of the country.
But go back to your experience as a city councilor. What are the things that can be done at the city council level that build these relationships, or just even at the city or town level?
Yeah, it just seems, Ali, that the division has just continued to fester and to grow. And I think what happens is that the adults need to take over the process and call people to the table and to reach an agreement. This is something that I think Americans desperately want, and the leaders who show this kind of initiative, I think, are going to be rewarded by the American people. But we just haven't seen it, unfortunately. Or at least we've seen it, but by very few people up on the Hill.
Mm-hmm. Let me, if you don't mind, go back to you growing up. Are your parents still with us?
Yes, they actually have. They retired about 10 years ago from the small business that they had built up and returned back to Mexico. And they've lived in Mexico now for the last 10 years, back in Garza Gonzalez.
So when you went in, and did they live in Toppenish when you were city councilor?
Yes, my parents, after working in the fields for about 25 years, took their life savings and they risked their savings on a small business, a small hotel in the small town of Toppenish. And they ran that hotel for about 10 to 12 years before retiring. They sold their money for their hotel for 3 times what they had bought it for. And it was, for Dad, it was the realization of the American dream, right? Where now you can have enough capital to retire and finally, have a good life. And meanwhile, of course, I was on a different track, now working in public policy and politics.
And I'm assuming that they voted for you?
It's like John F. Kennedy says, you can't count on anybody's vote except your mom's, and you better make sure she's registered. So they did, actually. I'm proud that they're proud of me. I guess is what I could say to that.
The reason I wanted to go back to that, because they grew up in an experience where the current dreamers, their parents, are growing up in. So when your parents, read what you're saying, see you on television, when you see them in Mexico, how do you articulate the frustration that you have about the political process to them? What's their advice back?
Yeah, we see, of course, they've been around way longer than I have, right? And they've seen the political process, from their end, and they've been frustrated in the past too. Now, my dad is kind of like an original dreamer. When he was 12 years old, he crossed the Rio Grande on the shoulders of his uncle illegally. When they were, coming to work in the fields back when he was a small boy. And they would go to Miami, Montana, Virginia, and all over the country. It was the strangest thing. Back then, though, in the 50s, farmers could actually sponsor, farm workers. And Dad got a green card when he was about 15, 16. And so he's been legal since. But he was brought over by his parents illegally. And so he's sympathetic, to what the dreamers are going through. And maybe that makes me work a little extra hard for them on their behalf, because there but for the grace of God go I, honestly, or any one of us.
Right. And then how did you, sorry to bounce around a little bit here, but how did you go from city council to the Bush administration?
Yeah. So I had I self-identified as a Republican. I don't want to make it political, but that was the reality. because of the issues that I, agreed with, right? I was pro-life. I felt strong about, the private sector or free markets, a strong military and these kind of things. And well, there was very few of us Latinos in the Republican Party to begin with. And in Washington State, I was a rare breed. And so, I sensed that some of the folks in the party took me under their wing and groomed me and opened up some doors for me. I was very fortunate. And I helped Congressman Doc Hastings actually win his election in 1994 during the whole Gingrich Revolution, when the Republicans took the House. And he actually made me his congressional staffer. So I also worked for a congressman at the district office level while I was city councilman. So that was quite an experience to work at the federal level, but have a local leadership position as well. So I gained a lot of insight, a lot of experience off of that. So of course that put me on track within the party itself. And the Bush campaign came calling when he ran for president, and they offered me the position of president of Hispanics for Bush. So Bush wins the White House, and I got invited to form part of the administration, Department of Interior. That's the way it went. It was a shock to me.
Yeah. And that role at Interior, I mean, did that tie back to your experience, as a farm worker at all?
It sure did, because one, I didn't have a lot of experience or knowledge about the Department of Interior. So I worked hard, right? Taking care of the details. I was first in, last out, just to make sure, that to prove to folks that I belonged there. And I got promoted about 3 months into the job to executive director of intergovernmental and external affairs. And during that position, I got to sit in on the morning executive meetings with the Secretary of the Interior. And so I formed part of the policy-making machine in the Department of Interior. And one of those issues was, should we allow nonprofit organizations to allow nonprofits to put water out for immigrants that were crossing the national parks, fish and wildlife refuges, or tribal lands? And of course, I argued for it. And I told them why. Because, my parents, I had personal experience with this. And so I made a case. And Ali, I'm not kidding. 90% of the folks in that meeting were arguing against it. And by the time it was all said and done, the secretary said, I agree with Daniel. So let's approve this and let's move on. And I got to tell you, Ali, my hands were shaking still. They moved on to other issues, but I just sat there and said that I felt this was maybe the purpose that God had put me there. And I don't know how many lives were saved because of that, but, it was one of my proudest moments.
It's almost like all those 6-1 losing votes paid off in a big, big, big way.
That's exactly right. Uh-huh. I just felt such relief and such a sense of accomplishment that, that I could sit there. And, here I'm thinking, I'm just a kid from the sticks, a farm worker. What do I know? Being in Washington, D.C. at a table with, people from Harvard and Yale and Princeton. And yet, I was, I think, able to draw from my own experience and make a persuasive argument and win over the Secretary of the Interior on that issue. And I just, again, it was just a proud accomplishment for me.
No, that's what representation looks like, right?
Well, that's exactly right. And in working hard, it turns out, I got the attention of the White House, and they called me 2 years into the job at the Department of Interior and said, hey, kid, we want you to come over. We've heard about the good things you're doing at the Department of Interior. And it was just one of my proudest moments to accept a position at the White House working for George W. Bush.
And what did your parents say then?
They were beyond themselves. They just couldn't believe that a son of theirs, would be working for the President of the United States at the White House. And again, I was proud that they were proud. But again, it's a testament to this country, right? That I think it's like Senator Ted Cruz says, this is still a country where anybody with nothing can achieve anything. And, no matter what your circumstances, I mean, you're talking about a high school dropout, who was able to overcome these barriers. Now, obviously, we all have our own challenges and our own barriers and obstacles to overcome, but all things are possible. I think if you just start making the right decisions and start being persistent about what you want.
The phrase that's coming to my mind is each of our ability, whether or not we have the opportunity to do so, but to reach our fullest potential. And, you never quite know what your potential is. But in your case, you worked hard, you kept on going, and you fulfilled your potential, and that means there's water in the desert for migrants.
It's interesting. Charles Koch likes to say that everybody is capable of extraordinary things, And I believe that 100%. But what we have to do is to remove the barriers that so many people are confronting, right? And if you're an immigrant, that comes to America, maybe your barriers are much more than those who have been around for second and third generation. And I think what we try to do at the Libre Initiative is to identify what those barriers are. So, we provide people classes, for learning English, getting their GED, getting their citizenship, status, workshops to how to start up a business, and getting a driver's license. These are all things that some of us take for granted, but they are major barriers to opportunity and success. And so, again, people are you're right, are capable of extraordinary things. We just need to work together and unite and remove the barriers that is keeping them from achieving their full potential.
But I also, kind of going back to my earlier question, okay, what do we need to do differently? Would a proposal be that instead of us always talking about kind of the policy outcome, we actually talk about the human outcome of a reformed immigration system? So that instead of thinking of, as so many people do, of immigrants as deficits or risks to the country, rather we should be talking about immigration reform that allows immigrants to unlock their fullest potential, which then helps everybody.
Oh, Ali, I couldn't agree with you more. Americans come to America to build a better life. And I think that's what motivates so many people and have motivated them, throughout the history of America. They see this as the land of opportunity like my parents did. And for more than 300 years, immigrants from every corner of the globe have risked their lives for a chance to contribute to this amazing economy that we have, right? And it's the fastest growing economy in history at this point. So I think by increasing the customer base for U.S. companies even and starting new businesses, immigrants create more new jobs than they fill. This has been the history of immigrants. And so I couldn't agree with you more. I think this is still a land where, anybody with nothing can achieve anything. And immigrants, more than anybody, I think symbolize that initiative, that American will, to achieve that American dream.
A perfect segue to the final question that I ask of everybody, and that is to just finish this sentence. And that sentence is, only in America, ...
Yeah, only in America. I'm going to repeat it. Can anybody with nothing achieve anything? This has been true of my parents, of my uncles and aunts, of my cousins, of myself. I can't point to anybody else except my own personal experience of, son of immigrants, high school dropout, who didn't look like he had potential for any kind of professional, aspiration, had no merits. And yet I look back at my life and the kind of things that I've been able to achieve and the kind of career I've had has been remarkable. And just by overcoming a lot of the barriers. But I need to say this, Ali, there have been really good people who have opened doors for me. And I am grateful and humbled, I think, by the kind of breaks that I've gotten. While maybe I didn't get dealt a good hand, in life, there are some people that just made those breaks for me. And I'm a person of gratitude.
Daniel, thank you so much for joining. You're, I think, the first person who's ever quoted Ted Cruz on the Only in America podcast.
Well, when he gets it right, he gets it right? So,
okay, we'll give him that.
I didn't mean to offend the sensibilities of your listeners.
Hey, we're a nonpartisan podcast.
You got it.
Hey, man, thank you.
Thank you, Ali.
Daniel Garza is the head of the Libre Initiative, a libertarian nonprofit organization which works to empower America's Hispanic communities. There's more about Daniel at our website, immigrationforum.org, and while you're there, subscribe to Only in America on your favorite platform. And if you're an iTunes user, please let us know what you think of the show by writing a review. That's all for this week. Only in America is produced by Emily Chow, Joanna Taylor, and Megan Wetmore. The executive producer is Kathleen Farrell. I'm Ali Nirani. Enjoy Immigrant Heritage Month, and I will talk to you next week.